Our next guest is Mark Meisenheimer, who joins us to share details about his new documentary film, Quindaro Ruins. Once an Underground Railroad site in Kansas, what's left of Old Quindaro not only fights to be relevant in the narratives of Kansas City 19th century history, but its residents fight for its neighborhood's existence. The Quindaro Ruins, once slated to be part of a landfill, is surrounded by a predominantly African-American neighborhood that has been de-invested and disenfranchised. The film showcases the struggle of many of the community members to keep its history alive. Mark Meisenheimer is a former TV journalist who's worked in TV news for 12 years, and the Quindaro Ruins won the award for exceptional excellence at Docs Without Borders International Film Festival in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. The film has also been shown at the Kansas City Film Fest International, the 15th International Film Festival in Bethesda, Maryland, and is scheduled for the National Underground Railroad Network Freedom Film Festival in Church Creek, Maryland. Mark Meisenheimer, thank you for being with us on Wednesday Midday Medley.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate all the plugs on the film. Hearing it back, it's been quite the journey. So it's neat to be able to hear that.
And basically reading your words written in your press release back to you. So thank you for writing that. And it's good to have some from the television journalism world here joining us here at KKFI, Kansas City Community Radio. People can go to QuindaroRuins.com to learn more about this project. But how did you get involved in this?
Yeah, the updates that we have for upcoming screenings and film festivals can be at, QuindaroRuins.com, and we'll keep updating that website as we're moving along here. But yes, really how I stumbled into Quindaro was I'd made a documentary, shown it on Amazon Prime, and it centered around my background in broadcasting. And coming out of that, I'd always wanted to do a more historical documentary, and I've always been interested in the Underground Railroad. And, after, we were all, I shouldn't say all of us, but many of us were touched by, when George Floyd lost his life. And as I was going through that, a good friend and myself were talking, and I just threw it out there. I said, how do we help? How do we help these, social issues, many of them centered around race? How do we use the skill set that we have to help in some way? And my answer was to make another documentary. And originally, what the film was centered around was giving prominence to the Underground Railroad in the Kansas, Missouri area, 19th century American history, and kind of stacking it up against the old Confederacy. Let's create a narrative where the heroes of yesterday are centered in the Underground Railroad, and kind of replacing what some folks had kind of like lifted up the old Confederacy. We've seen the statues coming down, we've heard the narratives changing, so we really thought about doing the documentary centered around that. And we started visiting sites in the area. Went down to Osawatomie, I was out at the Grover Barn in Lawrence, and we just kind of stumbled into Quindaro. And right away we could tell that there was something different going on there, that the contemporary history connected to the history of years ago, 19th century history, was really polarizing. And the more we got into it, the more we went away from that original idea about the Underground Railroad as a whole in this area, and really started centering on Quindaro.
It's a really interesting neighborhood, and when you go into that neighborhood, it's almost like an abandoned neighborhood. The Quindaro Boulevard has many, many businesses, an old bank that sat vacant for over 25 years, an old grocery store that's been vacant for over 25 years. And there's been efforts to bring parts of this neighborhood back to life in the business area, but there's been a lot of devastation that's occurred in this neighborhood for a number of reasons, right?
Yeah, I mean, you 635 runs through there. A lot of us drive on 635, and we don't realize that goes right through the heart of what was formerly the heart of Quindaro. Redlining, the war on drugs. The site was once slated to be a landfill. All these things that just, I guess it would devastate any neighborhood. And when we talked to the mayor of Kansas City, Kansas, as he recognized this, and I wrote in my write-up, it's his words where he said, disinvested and disenfranchised. So again, how do we help? And really the answer for us was to raise awareness. When I list all these things off, it reminds me just how complicated everything that's going on in Quindaro. And people have the best of intentions. It seems like everybody wants to raise up that site. And in the last few years, it reached a national commemorative status. And really what the neighborhood and the stakeholders are pushing for is that federal landmark status and have it fall under the national parks. But how do we get there? And it's very complicated. Multiple landowners, a lot of different people with a lot of different ideas. One of the great things that I learned while doing this documentary was that the Wyandotte Nation that was relocated here in 1843 from Ohio. They played a major role in that site, and they served as conductors of sorts, so that when the fugitive slaves came across the river, it was the Native Americans that were serving as help on the Underground Railroad. This is history that I had never heard of. Now, I'm not originally from Kansas City, but I've lived here for 17 years, and I consider myself a history buff. And these were some of these things I just like. How didn't I know about this? And typically when we talk to people in the Kansas City area, that is often the response I get. Have you heard of the Quindaro Ruins? No, I haven't. But when we explain it, it is so fascinating, and it's such a significant site. And I think it's the most significant historic site in Kansas City that goes mostly unknown in the mainstream.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me because I've been to the site, and it's only been in the last year or two that they've actually built this sort of lookout. There's like a place now that you can drive to and park your car and go into it's like a atrium kind of.
The overlook.
The overlook.
Okay, that's been there actually for a while, but that's maybe speaks to, if you're just becoming aware of this, it was kind of hidden back there. They've had a gate up. So the unified government.
It's only like 3 years old.
Oh no, that overlook has been there. That came shortly after the issues with the landfill back in the 80s. So it's been there for a good 20, 30 years.
The actual physical. Okay.
Yes, and what the talk is maybe doing an update. Now, again, I'm speaking anecdotally here, but maybe that needs an update even too, as we work together to try and create more prominence for the Quindaro Ruins.
From that overlook, you can walk down into what is kind of like a valley, and you can walk through and actually see the footings of what used to be buildings in a community that once was there. That's
absolutely
almost been erased in a way. And if you keep walking down through this valley, you'll end up going under the railroad tracks to the river, right to the very river where people were brought into this neighborhood from Missouri.
It's really awe-inspiring. You don't have to make the trek down. If you want to even just sit up in the overlook,
right?
It is amazing to you can. It creates a path of sorts where you can visualize the fugitive slaves coming across the Missouri River into the free state of Kansas. And it's just awe-inspiring, and I think it's one reason why folks in the area, see the potential.
You started doing a documentary about the Quindaro Ruins, but ended up learning about the Quindaro neighborhood.
Yeah.
KCK is this interesting city government that's made the whole county a city in a way. And there are all these little towns that ended up being combined into one metropolitan KCK, but Quindaro was its own little entity at one point. and that neighborhood there on Quindaro Boulevard represents that. What surprised you the most in learning about the neighborhood?
Well, I don't know if it surprised me, but we were just welcomed with such open arms. And when we went and looked at the site the first time, we went in. Let's grab a bite. There's a pizza place here, Wilson's Pizza, and from there, Gary Wilson, who owns that pizza shop, is sort of the de facto mayor. Nothing against Mayor Garner. Sorry,
Right.
I'm not trying to take anything away, but he's I believe his dad had a hardware store in that neighborhood. And so his family is
Gary's
really
had kids that went to school, and
yeah. So you
yes.
probably know Gary.
I do.
And
yes.
and what a guy. And we went in there for a slice of pizza, and he connected us to Anthony Hope, who's a curator at the Old Quindaro Museum, and from there it just blossomed. And it was and we interviewed Bernard, who runs a barber shop in town there. So I don't know if it surprised me, but it was so heartwarming that people welcomed us with open arms. Just a couple of guys, community outsiders with a camera coming in. And people are so eager to tell this story about Quindaro and the rich history, and how that rich history, I guess, impacts today. There's contemporary history there too. So it'd really be neat to see that area preserved, restored, the ruins especially. But there's so much potential there, and as you mentioned in your intro, the artist who grew up there, and it's interesting when I talk to people, and I was thinking about this where I was getting my hair cut, and the person cutting my hair said, "I grew up on Quindaro Boulevard," or somebody, my mom lived in Quindaro. There's so many unique and authentic connections to that community here in Kansas City, and I just think it's a story that needs a louder voice.
Yeah, Janelle Monáe, her mother was a janitor and a hotel maid, and her father, Michael Robinson Summers, was a truck driver, and the real, hardworking, working class folks whose kids went to Quindaro Elementary. And now Janelle Monáe is like internationally known actress and a singer, but still thinks about Quindaro a lot. What do you want people to walk away from this film thinking about and maybe trying to do?
Yeah, I think the first thing is just to create awareness. We want people to know about this. And I think there's a great awareness in Kansas City, Kansas, and the unified government is really starting to turn up the volume on some efforts and recognizing the importance of this. But I think ultimately what would be great is if the Quindaro Ruins could be mentioned alongside the Harry Truman Presidential Library and Museum, Union Station, the significant historic sites, the World War I Museum. That's one of the messages in the film. This site is as significant as all of them. And really, if we're saying there's a dinner conversation going on and all of these sites are kind of sitting down at the dinner table, the Quindaro Ruins deserve a spot at that table. And I would just encourage people to go visit the ruins. Go take a look. One of our the main people who's been an advocate for the ruins over the last 3 to 4 decades, and he was part of fighting the landfill, is Marvin Robinson. He's now a Kansas state representative. I think it's the 35th district, but every year on New Year's Day, he does. He kind of hosts a ceremony of sorts to celebrate the Emancipation Proclamation. And what he asks of people who attend is to bring an offering of black-eyed peas, collard greens, or sweet potatoes. And I think it's a great place to start. And so that's just a family tradition that I'm starting with my son and my wife, that on January 1st at noon, we go to the Quindaro Ruins to take a moment and recognize the significance of that event, and to recognize the significance of the ruins.
I love it. We have to know our history, and I think if you like I know when I first moved to Kansas City, I had to figure out the history of Kansas City to understand where I was living and why Kansas City is the way it is, and knowing that Missouri was on the Confederacy side of the Civil War and Kansas was on the free side explains so much of our history. And this story of the Quindaro Ruins is such a beautiful history of, as you mentioned, this native tribe of people mixed with these European immigrants, mixed with these African American people living in KCK in this neighborhood who all worked together to help free slaves from Missouri. And that story needs to be part of what we teach all of our kids in schools. You know, it's such an important part of our history and of our community. Thank you so much for making this film. And as we mentioned, people can go to QuindaroRuins.com to get updates about the film, and you're currently touring many different film festivals right now, aren't you?
Yeah, we've submitted to some film festivals, and on the site you can see where we'll have some local screenings. I'd also say, you know, Freedom Frontiers National Heritage Area is another great organization that promotes the history of the area. I want to promote the ruins, but I also want to promote this organization. They do a lot to preserve the history in this area. And hopefully, as we continue this conversation and we continue to elevate the Quindaro Ruins, ultimately it can get that national, landmark status. But there's a ways to go, and there's a lot of there's a lot of complicated issues there. But I think, just to go back to what you had asked, what can people do? Just at the very least, just take an interest in the ruins. Go visit the ruins, get to know the history of the area, educate yourself. And maybe, as I have the video journalism as my background, maybe there's a unique skill set that you have that you can help the folks in that area, because they will welcome you with open arms. And it's an amazing, wonderful neighborhood.
I love it. Mark Meisenheimer, thank you so much for being with us on the radio today. Please keep us posted and come back and talk with us again about projects that you're working on. I would love it.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me today.
Mark Meisenheimer's new documentary film, Quindaro Ruins, is scheduled for a screening at the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom Film Festival in Church Creek, Maryland. And as we mentioned, you can go to QuindaroRuins.com to learn more about this film and the Quindaro Ruins themselves.